do have a few announcements before I introduce our speaker. Now, first-year students, now is the time to take your selfies if you need your first-year connections points. Do it now, take the phone out, snap your selfie. I'm not going to be offended. Upcoming events. Next Tuesday evening in this space, yes, we will have our Unite worship service, which is all of our campus ministries joining together for worship. So I encourage you to be in this space at Coffee House at 6:30, service at 7. You're welcome to be here. Please join in. And also be on the lookout for information. If you haven't seen it already, our office is sponsoring a fall break trip. If you are not headed home for fall break and you would like to serve in your community, and we'll have a group headed over to Hot Springs, working with the Community Housing Coalition and doing some great work there and having a good time while we're at it. So look for that information if you're interested. Be sure to talk to Andrew or to Deborah or even to me. After our service today, you're welcome to join us out in the caf for lunch if you would like to continue the discussion on what you hear today. Our guest today comes to us from the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. So I want to tell you a little bit about this organization, and then I'll tell you a little bit about her. So the BJC's mission, as stated, is to defend and extend God-given religious liberty for all, furthering the Baptist heritage that champions the principle that religion must be freely exercised, neither advanced nor inhibited by government. The history on it, it's been around in some form since 1936, when it was the Southern Baptist Committee on Public Relations. It became the Baptist Joint Committee a decade later when it joined together with the National Baptists and the American Baptists and moved its office to Washington, D.C. It's now supported by 15 Baptist bodies that fights for religious liberty for all, working with other Christian groups, as well as with groups that represent Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and other religious and non-religious perspectives. The BJC, this comes from the website, the BJC stands guard at the intersection of church and state, defending the first freedom of the First Amendment by protecting both the free exercise of religion and defending against its establishment by government. So today we engage our minds as we talk about faith, as we talk about what it means to live by faith. What does it mean to live by faith in this country? And how is that protected? And what does that look like? Hollyn Hollman is our guest speaker today. She is the General Counsel and Associate Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. She provides legal analysis of church-state issues that arise before Congress, the courts, and administrative agencies. Her work includes preparing front-of-the-court briefs, issuing briefings for congressional staff and presentations for research institutions and religious groups. She consults regularly with churches, individuals, and organizations about religious liberty issues, and she writes a column for the BJC's magazine, Report from the Capitol. And she often discusses matters relating to church-state relations with members of the media and has appeared in numerous publications and broadcasts. So if you're really paying attention to these kinds of issues, this might even be a face that you recognize. And she's also serving as an adjunct professor of law at the Georgetown University Law Center. She earned her BA in politics from Wake Forest University and her JD from the University of Tennessee College of Law. So I encourage you to welcome her with open hearts and open minds to hear what she has to say to us today as we explore these issues together. And we will have some music, both before and after her talk, to prepare you and then to give you a chance to reflect upon what you've heard. Pray with me now this morning. Most Holy God, into this space, we welcome your presence, and we are humbled by your presence. We ask that in this moment you would bind us together as community seeking truth, seeking to further our knowledge of you, our relationship with you, what it means to live by faith in you. Be with us in this time. Open us wide open. Allow us to learn, allow us to hear, allow us to grow. May this time honor you and glorify you. Amen.
Humbly I stand and afraid. With open hands, Lord, I bring everything and nothing, my best,
Thank you so much for having me here at Chapel. It's my honor to be with you. It's my first time on campus, and I've already been warmly welcomed and look forward to this morning with you all, as well as the rest of today. I have some other time on campus. Thank you specifically to Chaplain Husky for the invitation to be with you, and my friends at First Baptist Asheville, who together came up with this scheme to bring me to Asheville, which is a place that I really love. It wasn't hard to get me here out of Washington, D.C. to come back to North Carolina and to be with such good friends here. Thank you, President Lunsford, for being here, and so many good friends in the BJC, people that I've known, or whose names I've known a long time, who have been supportive of our work. It's very heartening for me to see you, as well as to get a chance to engage with the students here on campus. So one of the first things I learned about Morrisville University in Chapel was that it's not mandatory. So I'm thoroughly impressed with the way the students here are taking advantage of this wonderful liberal arts college environment and taking advantage of their freedom in not only academic matters, but in spiritual matters, to take advantage of this beautiful chapel and this opportunity to come together as an academic community and reflect on things of faith and things that will continue to nurture you intellectually, spiritually, and personally, as this university's mission is set to do. So I went to the website of Mars Hill. I don't know how many students do that very regularly, but I can affirm with you the good choice you've made in choosing this university, and it's very clear dedication to you and your development. And one thing that what I learned, more specifically than I had known in the past, was how Mars Hill talks about its Baptist heritage and its commitment to freedom. And I bring this out, not because you don't know it, but because you probably didn't look at it this morning like I did, but because it draws us together and it will help make connections between what I'm going to talk about the rest of my time here. I understand that Mars Hill University is a place where faith and reason meet. That is appropriate for college education. And that your roots, that you claim your roots as Christian and a heritage as Baptist. Encouraging staff and faculty and alumni and students in the practice of their faith, honoring a variety of different faith traditions, denominations, and worship practices. And by experiencing the diversity of community, embracing the idea that we learn from each other, finding our own spiritual journeys, and then therefore being able to grow intellectually, spiritually, and personally. So what I'm seeing is that this is an institution that is living in this tradition of faith, this tradition of freedom in faith, to embrace that freedom and grow in who God would have you be. So I mention that, it's because I too come from an institution that is living in the same historical legacy, Christian legacy of faith and freedom. Thank you for that kind introduction, Chaplain McCluskey. And what I would like to do with my time here with you all is talk further about the work that we are called to do in the Baptist Joint Committee in Washington, D.C., as well as throughout the country as we travel and engage with different communities, to talk a little bit personally about how I was drawn to that work by faith. So if you indulge me a little bit to tell about my personal story about how we got there, and then how the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty got there to do what it does, and has done for now nearly 80 years. So first of all, I just have to say greetings from Washington, D.C. I come here on behalf of a staff that works every day on issues of religious freedom. We do that out of this mission. It's very clear, and while it touches on a lot of different things, it is really dedicated to one principle, and that is religious freedom for all. We work to defend and extend religious liberty for all. We do that a certain way. We do that championing our Baptist history and heritage that says that religion must be free, freely exercised, neither advanced nor inhibited by the government. We are supported by 15 Baptist entities, including the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina, the Progressive National Convention, American Baptist Churches USA, the Alliance of Baptists, these 15 different member bodies come together along with a body known as the Religious Liberty Committee, which is really individuals committed to our mission. They come together to support this work, this mission, to let us do our work and continue to build on the legacy of religious freedom. And it is my privilege then to serve in this long-standing organization to talk about why we do this work, why it's important today. As I'm sure you all have noticed, religious liberty as a term is sort of experiencing sort of a resurgence. It's in the news more often these days than maybe perhaps it has been for those of you who thought about this issue for a while. And for you younger students who are just hearing this, and maybe religious liberty is talked about in ways that are very specific to this particular political context, it's important for you to dig deep and find out why your university talks about religious liberty historically, why the faith tradition that this university has historically been aligned with, or comes out of that heritage, has this history of religious liberty. So that's what I'm hoping that as you leave today, you'll continue to think about and have a richer understanding of. So how did I get here? Well, I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and I raised in a Christian home, and as I went to Baptist churches and eventually professed my faith, I didn't know that I was doing something historically Baptist with an embrace of religious liberty. But for those who grew up in the same tradition, you know that in the Baptist tradition, at some point, you have to step out in the aisle by yourself, walking out, embracing that freedom. You're not born Baptist. In this country, you're not born anything when it comes to religion. Think about that. In some countries, you are born in England, born into be a citizen of Great Britain, and also part of the Church of England. All the religious affiliations that we claim in America are voluntary. Now, the level of voluntarism in your own home may vary. And I can tell you, my home wasn't all voluntary as far as being in church 3 times a week. But when it came time for me to embrace my Christianity, there was an individual responsibility and freedom that I exercised that later on I understood why Baptists were committed to religious freedom and how I had experienced that without even knowing that there was that strong connection. I started off at Mississippi College. I ended up at Wake Forest, as Stephanie said. But it was at Mississippi College when I first recognized so many different ways that Christianity, Baptist faith, but Christianity and other things were expressed, and I began to grow in my understanding of the privilege that I had as an American growing up and having the kind of religious freedom that we had. To understand that the choices I could make that may not look so much like choices because I was around so many that were of similar faith, but as I was exposed to others, realized that this was a gift and made me think about, why is that? What is it about America that embraces religious freedom, and how does that work? I had a very, obviously, formative experience that I didn't know would be at the time, and then I came to be an intern at Baptist Joint Committee in Washington, D.C. We have an internship program every semester. 2 to 3 students come from different places. We've had interns from Marsville come and work in our office. And that gave me a chance to explore, to learn more about this work with the Baptist Joint Committee, the tradition, and also to grow in what I was going to do. And I eventually was drawn to the law and went to law school and became a litigator. Eventually was drawn back to become general counsel of the Baptist Joint Committee. Long story, but I put it out there because you students never know which class, which internship, which professor, which community leader you're going to interact with. It's going to mean something to you and change your life. That's part of the opportunity that you have here at a liberal arts college, university. So, what does that mean? And what do we do? Well, our work at the Baptist Joint Committee in pursuing this mission is in pursuit of legislation, litigation, and education. Those are the three areas in which we say we work. The legislation part is that we have offices on Capitol Hill to monitor Congress whenever Congress is passing laws that have to do with the relationship between church and state and what can affect our religious freedom. On the litigation front, our offices are right by the Supreme Court, and we monitor cases as they work their way up to the court. And then the biggest ones that get to the Supreme Court, where then everybody pays attention, we often have the opportunity to intervene through friend of the court briefs, where we bring that historical Baptist witness to the controversies where the court figures out what are the parameters, the limits and extent of religious freedom, and how do we honor all that religious diversity and still hold our society together, what holds us together, and what are the kind of boundaries of that freedom. And then, of course, we are dedicated to education, to understanding and embracing our freedom and why we have it, and why it's important, so that we can continue to, because there are always strains and push and pull on, from political perspectives, that would alter our freedom and change things, and we're very wary of anything that would fundamentally change this kind of commitment to religious freedom that we have enjoyed and benefited from so much. Biggest question I get when I meet people is why? Why would there be a Baptist organization dedicated to religious freedom? Like, how does this make sense? And I have a story, and that's what I'm going to tell you today. As all of you know, there are so many different expressions of Baptist life, just as there are so many expressions of Christian life. And so when you throw out these labels, they don't necessarily communicate to somebody one clear thought. When you say that you are a Christian, or when you say that you are Baptist, or Catholic, or Presbyterian, and people's minds bring different things depending on their experience. But the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty has been dedicated to this mission, and I like to talk about that, explain that as three reasons. We pursue this mission for reasons that are theological, that are historical, and that are practical or experiential. And when I'm talking to you today, I'm going to invert this. I'm going to start off with the practical, because I've kind of touched on that a little bit, and say my own understanding of realizing the good fortune and having grown up in a country where you do get to decide matters of religion. They're not assigned to you by the state. And your rights of citizenship, your political rights, aren't determined by what you believe or what religion you're a part of. So that's first. Why are we dedicated to religious freedom? Because it works. We have benefited from it. The way that America does religious freedom starts with the first 16 words of the First Amendment that say, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those first 16 words of the Bill of Rights show a strong commitment at the very beginning that this country was dedicated not to being a particular kind of religious nation, although we still have to fight the myth of a Christian nation, the idea that we somehow are a Christian nation legally and Christians should be preference in the law. There's nothing in our founding documents to indicate that. Instead, we have this commitment right up front of the Bill of Rights for religious freedom for all, that there's this free exercise clause, that the government shouldn't inhibit religion, people should be able to exercise their religion, and there's no establishment. It says the government is not going to tell you what to do. The government is not going to do your religious work for you. It's not going to advance religion. It's not going to pick your religion over someone else's. How's that work for us? Pretty well. We look around the world and we see other models where church and state are combined, and we see many troubles that we have escaped, many difficulties for religious communities that have suffered terribly over the combination of church and state, where that civic power is joined with that religious enthusiasm and claim in ways that inevitably end up persecuting those who disagree, who feel different, who are drawn, whose conscience leads them otherwise. It's a pretty good reason to care about religious liberty and protect it. We might have a lot to lose. Secondly, we have responsibility historically. Our commitment at the Baptist Joint Committee but also anyone who is part of a Baptist institution and still claims that heritage that is tied to that American heritage should know something about our history and where we came from. This commitment to religious freedom has not only meant that we can pursue religion in all its diversity, or not. Obviously, people have the choice not to pursue religion and have the same rights as we have, but it's created the conditions by which we and others of different faith perspectives can pursue justice, can pursue all of the things that we care about, that God leads us to do to work in the world. By embracing that religious freedom for all, it's a basic kind of condition that lets us work together, faiths come together. And I know at this campus and the many churches in Asheville, in this community, there are so many opportunities to bring your faith to matters of justice and peace and increasing social services and care for the earth and all of the kind of service opportunities that you all are engaging in. So what historically had led us to that? Well, we like to claim that Baptist, in this particular Baptist history, led to, and there are some good historical evidence in religious liberty. We study our history for what it teaches us about how we got here, and it inspires us. And I was thinking about our former executive director. I had met some things as I came in here. We mentioned James Dunn, who was this great leader of the Baptist Joint Committee, a fiery, wonderful speaker who died just last year, but he continues to inspire me. I remember something that I read that James wrote that I really liked when thinking about history. He says, "We don't live in a spaceship moment with no ties to the past or future." I think kind of like, we're not in some kind of time travel just here. We are connected to the past and the future. What's gone before us makes us who we are. God has been at work in the lives of his people, and it's blasphemy to say you don't care about history. So if you'll forgive me for a minute, I'll talk a little bit about history. It is, historically, Baptists have articulated a clear vision of religious liberty that has been effective in leading in the political sphere, constitutionally and other laws. The vision of our Baptist forebears was grounded in an understanding about God and faith, and we'll get to that. But it came out of an experience of being persecuted by civil authorities that did not respect the boundaries between church and state, did not see the difference between religious authority and civil authority. The very earliest pioneers of the Baptist movement in England, John Smith and Thomas Hollis, had to demand freedom of conscience and the separation of church and state. It was for them a matter of great conscience and of survival. So going back all the way to 1612, we have one of the earliest treatises on religious freedom. Thomas Hollis wrote a short declaration on the mystery of iniquity. And this is a cheap history lesson because it's coming from a lawyer in chapel. But I'm going to hit some highlights, and hopefully it inspires you to think about what history brings to us. But this is incredible to me to think about in 1612, someone writing as a persecuted minority to the king and calling the king on this basic idea that there's something human that requires freedom. In a note accompanying this treatise, he sent to King James I, Hollis wrote, "The king is a mortal man and not God, and therefore has no power over the immortal souls of his subjects to make laws and ordinances for them and to set spiritual lords over them." How do you get that one over? Not very well. But that statement of religious liberty, of the separation between church and state, goes back that far and has had influence through all this time. So as I tell these history stories, I want to point out some themes that can continue to serve us well today. And that theme is that there are separate spheres of religion and civil authority, separate sources of power. And we need to be aware of that and be careful when those are combined. Later, it was Baptist Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, the first Baptist church in North America, who helped many understand the concept of soul freedom. As Baptists claim, this idea that we must make up our own minds about religion, that we are accountable to God, nurtured through faith in church. We come to God one at a time. Back to the idea of you have to decide. Are you going to claim your religious tradition? Are you going to claim your religious belief? Are you going to commit yourself to that or not? And it was Williams that first said it was necessary to protect the garden of the church from the wilderness of the world. So when you hear separation of church and state, and sometimes in political conversations you'll hear it affiliated with weird ideas, a lot of negativity. Try to think about that root idea of separate spheres and the idea that there's a separation that needs to occur so that religion is free and blooms, not inhibited or harmed or manipulated by the state. And know that that is at base this idea that came from religious voices first. Interestingly, one of my favorite quotes from Roger Williams, in addition to claiming the separation, is this quote. He said, "An enforced uniformity of religion throughout a nation or civil state confounds the civil and religious, denies the principles of Christianity and civility, and that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh." If you think about that, we have a lot of fights trying to enforce uniformity. Maybe we should think about why we aren't always uniform. And maybe that is a sign, not of a problem, but that God is alive and at work in our lives. So that tradition of separation, more than 150 years before Thomas Jefferson talked about it, reminds me of something we always need to think about now, and how our religious freedom depends on an embrace of individual responsibility and autonomy, and the fact that we have a lived faith, not a static one. The third historical example I'll mention is Baptist evangelist John Leland from my home state, Virginia, who advocated for religious freedom and fight for disestablishment in Virginia. You know the American story that I talked about at the beginning, embracing religious freedom was hard fought. People came here from escaping establishments, but then what did they do? Set up their own establishments, but different ones, different colonies, different ones. At least you weren't oppressed by who you've been oppressed by before, but it didn't quite, soon enough, the problems were the arrangement itself. And John Leland was an evangelist in Virginia who fought against their established church, which was the Anglican Church. And it was especially informative, this fight in Virginia was especially informative for the nation's founders, and that John Leland had a direct influence on James Madison to lead to those first 16 Lords of the First Amendment. He demanded that it wasn't enough that the Constitution didn't talk about religion, that there was Article 6 that said there should be no religious test for office, but then you needed specific protections to make sure that there would not be an establishment of religion. So that came out of this fiery separationist who was also this evangelical Christian who was offended by the idea that people would not come to faith honestly, naturally, by conscience through God, but instead by the coercive powers of the state. We didn't want to have anything to do with that. In The Rights of Conscience Inalienable that he wrote, he made this statement: "Let every man speak freely without fear, maintain the principles that he believes, worship according to his faith, either one God, three God, no God, or 20 gods, and let the government protect him in doing so." It's quite an affirmation of freedom from someone who, if given the opportunity, would try to introduce you to Christ and bring you to a Christian faith. But he realized that for that to work, you needed these conditions of freedom. So the principle that I take from Leland is that we need to remember is fearless confidence in God's work and in the good of religion without government's assistance. I think those are pretty good historical reasons to keep caring and doing the work of religious freedom. But the third reason, and the one I usually put first, but I'll put last here, is a basic theological reason. And again, you got a lawyer, not a preacher, so you don't get a deep theological impact in here, but one that I think we all can think about and embrace, and that is these historical stories must have come from a deep understanding and belief in conscience and God at work in their lives. And it's from the very beginning of the Hebrew Scripture, when we God's image, free to and responsible in matters of religion, that we see this importance of freedom to faith. The idea of freedom runs throughout the New Testament in lots of different ways, and I've been lucky enough to hear some fantastic sermons, and I assume some of you have, some of you have given them right now, about how freedom is necessary for God's work in the world and for us to share the love of Jesus. But at its very core, if you believe that we are all created in God's image, then you know that we must honor that in others. That by embracing religious freedom for all, we are in fact honoring God's creation. And it is something that I have found not only gives us the confidence in our pursuit of religious freedom, but also the respect of those with whom we disagree. People from across different religious traditions or no tradition can respect the work that we do for religious freedom for all and be more likely to listen to us in any matters of faith when they understand that you recognize their humanity in a way that you want them to recognize yours, because we're all God's children. That's the message I wanted to bring for y'all today. And I want to conclude by just encouraging each of you, students especially, to embrace this freedom that you've been given, this legacy upon which your university is built upon, and the institution that I work for is built upon, and we engage in. And to think about that as you pursue your life of faith, to do so respectfully, honoring not only what you're called to do, but honoring the respect and choices of others as you do that. So I want you all to claim that role and that responsibility, and to remember that you are part of a historical story starting long before you got here, and it will continue long after you are gone. And to embrace that freedom, and to do that with these principles in mind as you go into the world and engage in different ways and encounter people from all different walks of life, that you not only can honor their freedom, but that you have the responsibility to do that, because what you are doing is because those who have come before you have done that and recognize these similar points. Thank you.